Let's go ahead and bring up the panel number 3, the opponents to Proposition 16. That would be John Giesman, former chair of the California Energy Commission, Paul Hauser, director of Reading Electric Utility, Michael Bocadero, executive director of the Agricultural Energy Consumers Association, and Supervisor Ross Mirkarimi from District 5, the city of San Francisco. Gentlemen, happy to start, please.
I'm John Giesman. You promoted me. I was not the chair. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be heard in opposition to Proposition 16. I delivered my first legislative testimony before your predecessor committees in 1975. In the ensuing 35 years, besides spending 2 decades in the bond markets, I served as the executive director of the California Energy Commission when Jerry Brown was governor, as the chairman of the California Power Exchange during our disastrous experience with incompetent market regulation, as a board member of the Cal ISO when Governor Davis asserted state authority over that body, and as the attorney member of the California Energy Commission from 2002 to 2008, chairing its renewable energy and power plant siting committees. I'm proud to say that we licensed 26 power plants and 1 transmission line during my most recent tenure, the CEC. I'm retired now, but spend much of my volunteer time as the co-chair of the American Council on Renewable Energy, prodding governments around the world to recalibrate their energy policies in order to accelerate the pace of technological change. Never in all of that time or in any of those venues have I seen political activity by a regulated utility so far outside the bounds of acceptable conduct as PG&E's sole sponsorship of the constitutional amendment politely referred to as Proposition 16. I'm mindful of the contempt of the legislative process, reliance on deceptive wording, and resort to strong-arm tactics that are manifest in PG&E's campaign. But today I want to take Proposition 16 at face value and focus your attention on 3 tapeworms that eat away at the internal logic of the measure itself. Tapeworm number 1 is the elimination of customer choice. Who among us in today's economy doesn't recognize that fewer choices mean higher prices? That's true for any commodity. Yet Proposition 16 actually wants to restrict the ability of electricity consumers to buy from anyone other than for-profit monopolies. Has California ever faced a greater need to bring downward competitive pressures on the price of electricity? But PG&E wants to lock its monopoly advantage into the state constitution. Tapeworm number 2 is the mystery of where all of this campaign money is coming from. PG&E says it will spend up to $35 million and insists all of that money will come from its shareholders. You and I know that every nickel that passes through PG&E's books comes from its captive customers. Its regulated utility is the only business PG&E has. The CPUC determines what PG&E's cost of capital should be in order to provide for investment in needed infrastructure. But it sure doesn't set that rate at a level calculated to create a $35 million slush fund for sole-sponsored political adventurism. It ought to be illegal to take ratepayer money and use it politically against ratepayer interests. If PG&E is making an excessive return, it ought to give the money back. Tapeworm number 3 is a serious drafting error in the grandfather clause of Proposition 16. The authors attempted to exempt existing municipal utilities operating within their current territories, but they used an outmoded and unworkable sole provider definition. That means that within the 48 existing munis, every new connection, every new home buyer, every new business would be subject to an election requiring the approval of 2/3 of the voters. That's the kind of drafting mistake The legislative committee process is designed to prevent. 3 tapeworms are enough to kill even the meanest dog, and you ought to do what you can to put this mongrel down. Your colleagues in the Senate who signed on to the Steinberg letter in December had it right. PG&E should acknowledge its mistake, abandon its campaign, and bring whatever grievance it thinks it has back to the legislature for further consideration. Thank you.
Very good. Who's next?
I'll be next. Good afternoon. My name's Paul Hooser. I'm the Electric Utility Director for the City of Reading, and I'm here to inform you about the potential impacts of Proposition 16 to the City of Reading. I want to apologize up front because I want to deviate from my prepared comments. Based on some of the assertions that the proponents made, I just feel obligated to set the record straight because there were some implications that somehow municipal utility providers are incompetent or incapable of reliably serving residents, and I'm going to throw out some statistics that I keep with me all the time to maybe demonstrate otherwise. Reading's a medium-sized city. We have about 90,000 residents. The Reading Electric Utility has served those residents reliably since 1921. We currently have a peak of about 250 megawatts, so we're extremely small compared to a PG&E. But we own generation, transmission, distribution. We have a portfolio that's 64% carbon-free. And you know, as a demonstration of our success, we collect about $100 million in retail revenues from our entire rate base. We serve the city limits. If we were to apply PG&E's rate structure to our customers, they would pay $140 million for the same service. You know, to put that in perspective, that's more than $440 more confiscated for every man, woman, and child in the city of Reading. That's in a county with an unemployment rate of 16%. It would be absolutely devastating. We also participate in wholesale markets. We issue bonds for infrastructure and capital. So even though we're small, we do those things that the investor-owned utilities do. For the privilege of paying $40 million less collectively for electricity, we also have an exceptional reliability record. The average outage, if you look back at the last 5 years for our customers, they average less than 20 minutes per year of outage. That number is 5 times higher for PG&E in our area. You know, so I think those broad numbers kind of demonstrate that municipal utilities aren't incompetent or incapable of providing reliable electric service to our customers. To get into just a few specifics, because we have other speakers here and time is limited, City Council on December 1st of 2009, Reading City Council unanimously approved a resolution opposing Proposition 16, primarily on economic grounds. We recently have constructed or started a Stillwater Business Park in Reading, and as you could tell from the 16% unemployment rate, economic growth is very vital to the city of Reading. Right now, one of the key marketing issues for the Stillwater Business Park is our local electric utilities, low rates, and reliable service. If Prop 16 were to pass in the future, it would be extremely difficult to create a business park like that outside our existing boundaries. Well, it would be unlikely we would do so because we'd lose that ability to market our utilities' lower rates and reliable service. You know, for this reason and many others, the City Council's passed this resolution unanimously opposing Proposition 16, and I'll be glad to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you. Who's going to follow? Mr. Bocadero?
Michael Bocadero on behalf of the Ag Energy Consumers Association. We're apparently the part of the business community not represented by the State Chamber. We've represented the interests of agriculture before this legislature for the past 20 years. We've intervened on behalf of agriculture at the Public Utilities Commission for the past 20 years. We've got about 40,000 individual growers that are part of our coalition, including all the state's leading ag associations and major water agencies. We've got a great deal of experience working with customers and the investor-owned utilities known as irrigation districts in the Central Valley, Modesto, Turlock, Merced, and others that do a fine job of providing competitive electric service to PG&E. We've also had a fairly cooperative relationship with PG&E. We've done some great things together, including converting a bunch of diesel engines back to electricity to improve air quality in the valley. So our position in opposition to Proposition 16 was not taken lightly. But like the others we've heard about CCA, this will have a chilling effect on competition, not just from CCA, but from the irrigation districts as well. And it's very, very important competition. I've handed out a chart that shows some of the competitive rates compared for agricultural customers in the state. The rates are about half of what PG&E's comparative rates for similar agricultural customers are. And so that level of competition is very, very important to the agricultural community, and this proposition will have a chilling effect on any further development of competition. They're not doing this to protect ratepayers. We're their ratepayers. They're not doing this to protect us. They're doing this to protect shareholders. Let's not dance around that the way PG&E did. That's perfectly clear. If they wanted to protect ratepayers, they have an opportunity to withdraw the $1 billion rate increase that they filed earlier this year at the Public Utilities Commission. That rate increase is an example of the sort of rate increases we think we're going to see in the future as a result of a lack of competition. $1 billion a year increase at a time when we're trying to pull this economy out of its recession. That's $1 billion to the people, the families that are trying to stay in their homes. That's $1 billion to the workers who are trying to keep their jobs and the businesses that are trying to keep their doors open. From a farmer perspective, we're in a very significant water crisis. During water crises, we use additional electricity because we're not getting surface water supplies. We're forced to use groundwater. And so rate increases of this nature have a chilling effect on the farm community because we're using higher priced power from PG&E. At the same time, we're being forced to pump additional groundwater and use additional electricity. So we are extremely concerned with the nature of the proposition and the chilling effect that it's going to have on competition. Let me just conclude with two suggestions. You got one from Mr. Giesman that I think is a good one. The legislature really, I understand, can't do anything with the proposition, but we really do need to explore the relationship between the regulated utility and the parent corporation. Senator Dunn went down this path a few years ago, and it may be time again. That corporation was created at a time that was designed to protect ratepayers when PG&E had a number of unregulated businesses that were also part of the corporation. Those businesses are all bankrupt now or gone, and so maybe it's time that the legislature took a very hard look at whether or not that parent corporation needs to exist. And then secondly, if PG&E really believes that ratepayers should have a right to vote, then maybe ratepayers ought to have a right to vote on rate increases in the future. And establishing the same two-thirds threshold, I'd even opt for a majority threshold. I'd be fine with that. To give us an opportunity as to whether or not we wanted to see a $1 billion rate increase, I think would be a very positive move that folks in the legislature could take a look at in terms of these significant impacts that these types of rate increases have on customers. Thank you.
Very good, Supervisor.
Good afternoon. I'm Ross McGarimi, Supervisor, District 5 in San Francisco. Delighted to be here, honorable committee members. I also chair LAFCO in the City and County of San Francisco. And I'm delighted to be the State Senate's appointee, one of the appointees to the California Coastal Commission as well. I had prepared remarks, but I have to tell you I was quite inspired by the remarks of PG&E and the Chamber of Commerce and others to slightly deviate from what I think I wanted to share with you. I am completely amazed at the shameful and brazen arrogance by PG&E to stand here before you to simply try to justify their desire to kill all competition and use the voter process in order to validate that particular aim. It almost makes me nostalgic, quite frankly, in listening back to the days of the congressional hearings when the tobacco industry was trying to remark on how smoking is good for you. That is exactly on par with what PG&E and those who advocate for them, I think, are doing right here. What is at risk is our democracy. And drawing recently, I think, from the Supreme Court ruling that unchecked, I think, corporate influence in our political landscape nationally, so goes, I think, to the landscape of what PG&E is doing by flouting our democracy here in California. Tensions are well known in San Francisco and PG&E at times because unlike any other region in this country or in California, we own our assets. We were bequeathed Hetch Hetchy in 1917. We have attempted on numerous occasions in order to try to seek some independence in helping diversify our energy portfolio through public power campaigns, which I am a veteran of, and through other legislative and electoral means. We have sought to simply try to aspire to the wishes of many ratepayers and the citizens of San Francisco in doing better than what PG&E is able to deliver. But we thought we found a happy medium, and that was through the passage of Assembly Bill 117. Because of the bill, in and itself allowed for peaceful coexistence, and so that both PG&E, who gets to remain and who is headquartered in San Francisco, in order to provide the service that they have done so for decades, and allowing us to be able to provide an alternative service should the people elect for that particular service. That is our right. It is a statutory right that has been provided by the state legislature, and we appreciate that determination. For nearly 8 years, almost in line at the time that we've been paying for PG&E's bankruptcy, the same time that we've been preparing for us to be able to sculpt our own community choice aggregation program. We've appreciated that PG&E has remained neutral up until this particular point, but seeing that our endeavors now may be actualized into some meaningful reality is now where we're seeing PG&E begin to exercise their old selves in trying to subvert the very will that they had contributed in initially hoping would become a reality that we could all coexist by. This is what's dangerous, because it's not just the initiative process in itself that PG&E is simply trying to alter the landscape of which they said that they would abide by. It's what they're good at. We have seen most recently in 2008 in a campaign that even PG&E referred to as Proposition H in a locality like San Francisco, where they had recorded over $10 million in a slight change of our law and how we would be able to modify the ability of having some municipal delivery of energy in itself compared to the advocates who'd spent less than $50,000, $10 million to $50,000. By PG&E saying what they have said boldly in saying that it's up to the voters' right, it's up to the voters' right because that they know they get to control the political landscape because of the unchecked influence of money within our initiative process or within the political arena so that they're able to win and win by blitzkrieg efforts. Those blitzkrieg efforts have been well known even when it's not electorally driven at the initiative process. For example, other municipalities and regions who seek CCA or public power or some hybrid version thereof have been inundated by leaflets, as we are now in San Francisco, in mailers that distort and misrepresent exactly what it is that we're attempting to do. If those don't succeed in itself by not creating a surgency that PG&E would like, then they go to community groups and they well splay their dollars and to try to pay off community groups using shareholder or ratepayer money, certainly in try to buy, I think, those advocates in those particular communities. And it's effective. We've seen this for decades. And then thirdly, of course, they'll try to win at the ballot box and win at all costs. As brazen as them as the Chronicle had reported that they will spend upwards to $35 million. We're not going to be able to amass that kind of war chest, nor should we have to. And the fact that they would actually manipulate the very process of using a simple majority ballot in order to impose a two-third entitlement within this state's constitution is absolutely absurd and should be laughed out of the political arena anywhere here in Sacramento, just like I think Prop 17 should be as well, too. And just in the same way that I think that we are taking a complete hit on the chin by allowing our democracy to be completely undermined when you see corporate overlords like PG&E take control of our political landscape and our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Questions from members of the committee or committees? You don't have to, but if you'd like to, Senator Leno.
I'll go second.
I think you're the only one in the queue.
Thank you all for your presentations. Refreshing, to say the least. Mr. Giesman, did you hear PG&E counter your third tapeworm explanation today.
No, I have not.
So no one seems to be debating the point that you've made there.
I think simply walking through the language in the proposed amendment makes clear that in order to be exempted, an existing municipal utility would have to be able to conclusively prove in court that it is the sole provider within its service territory. Possibly in the 1960s and the 1970s, that was a no-brainer. But in that period of time since, we've had the rise of direct access contracts, we've had the development of third-party owned cogeneration projects, we've had the promotion of solar power purchase agreements. There is not a single municipal utility in this state that could prove conclusively in Superior Court, and there is no centralized database to rely upon. There's not a single utility that could prove in Superior Court that it meets that standard. And as a consequence, someone, and there are some 250,000 of us lawyers licensed in California, so one of us will be able to challenge any new connection, any new home purchaser, any new business connection, anything that involves a new utility account under the terms of this amendment would be subject to an election with a required approval of a two-thirds majority of the voters.
So when I quoted you earlier, it was in appropriate context.
Absolutely.
That any of the several dozen similarly impacted jurisdictions of municipal utility districts such as Anaheim, Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena, or Riverside, your new neighbor isn't going to be getting his electricity turned on until two-thirds of the voters say so. And you stand by that?
I certainly do. And let's say that argument is wrong. Somebody is going to have to go to court if this passes. Someone is going to have to go to court and have it overturned. And as a consequence, you have got an extraordinary chilling effect on the business climate and on the real estate market in those 48 communities.
That was my next question, because I asked that of the LAO, and they didn't want to venture down that path. But this could have serious impacts to the overall California economy, without a doubt.
I don't think there's any question, and I believe that is why the realtors, California Association of Realtors, has opposed this ballot measure. There's no reason why anybody wants to say that. On the other hand, none of the municipal utilities have an interest in calling attention, or the attention of their bondholders, to that particular problem. None of the existing real estate agents have an interest in calling attention to that problem because of the potential chilling effect. But I think that were this the legislative committee process, it's the type of drafting problem that would have been worked out months and months in advance of a bill being considered for final consideration.
I appreciate your support in making that statement. Again, I think it's no small mistake that PG&E did not return to the legislature. They're welcome to a change of opinion, certainly, without a doubt. But that's what this body exists for. That's what this building exists for. It's what this institution exists for. And it's beyond disrespectful. Gentleman from Reading, I didn't get your name.
Paul Hooser.
Thank you for your testimony and your concern with the very aspects that we're talking about here, in that, as you were saying, you would not be able to promote your lower rates and your better delivery of service, which is your calling card.
Absolutely, that's the case. And if you can imagine over time, 10 or 20 years, as the city expands and annexes, and it's almost impossible to overcome this two-thirds hurdle. You have a core part of the city that has a traditional municipal electric service.
Just a high bar. It's not a hurdle.
Right. High bar.
High bar.
But that expanded area, you eventually grow over time to where the taxpayers and the ratepayers are no longer the same group, and it becomes, not only are there public safety issues when you have a fire and who's the electric provider when you want to get service disconnected to a building or a structure that may be on fire, but you also lose the political will to support the traditional utility when you need assets. You have, at some point, a larger constituency not served by the municipal utility than currently served. In this body, I'm sure, can just imagine the political ramifications as you go down that path.
Thank you, sir. And then lastly, Mr. Giesman, your second tapeworm, the mystery of where the $35 million comes from, you said it ought to be illegal. As an attorney, if you have any suggestions how we could make it so, I'm here to author the bill.
I'll give that some consideration.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Skinner.
Well, my question was going to sort of follow the point that you made about, I did find it kind of alarming that there were no restrictions, or it would appear that there are no restrictions to PG&E using ratepayer funds to, in effect, put on a ballot measure that would then restrict their own ratepayers. And you know, I'm not fully versed in what the different regs or legislation is that might govern that, but are there some restrictions that, you know, this expenditure was able to not have to comply? You know, I mean, doesn't fall under, or?
Assemblymember, PG&E would tell you that those are the shareholders' funds. Those aren't ratepayer funds, those are the shareholders' funds, because they keep that money in one pocket as opposed to the pocket that holds the ratepayer funds. But the Public Utilities Commission establishes rates and a rate of return calculated on PG&E's cost of capital in order to provide for the investment in needed infrastructure, not to create a slush fund for sole-sponsored political campaigns. So if these are the shareholder funds, it would seem that the Public Utilities Commission set PG&E's rate a bit too high. It's $35 million that's not going into the infrastructure improvements that might improve service to Mr. Leno's business. It's $35 million being set aside for a political campaign, which PG&E estimates is about 6 to 9 cents a share. Now, as you know, a number of the public employee unions, CalPERS, CalSTRS, end up owning PG&E stock as part of their indexed portfolios. I've been told that the teachers own about 2 million shares of PG&E stock. If, in fact, they are now a forced contributor to this ballot measure, I would think most of their members, and probably the trustees of CalSTRS, would prefer to see that money spent on dividend rather than campaign contributions to the ballot measure.
Maybe we need a 2/3 vote of the shareholders.
Other questions from committee? Seeing none, let's thank you very much to this panel.